friends, it's me, Em again, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things sinister. If you are interested in true crime, or if you like all things horror related, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. That way you can join me for some morbid conversation. Now, for today's story, we are going to be jumping into a very bizarre missing persons case. This young teenage woman seemed to have so much going on for her, and then all of a sudden, one day she just disappeared without a trace. With that being said, we're going to go back to the year 2015, and we are going to be talking about Katelin Akens. Katelin was 19 years old in the year 2015. Originally from Virginia, Katelin had moved away from her home state to Arizona in 2014 when she turned 18 years old. In Arizona, she lived with her fiance Amber, and she would return back to her home state for a family visit because her sister, Gabby, whom she was very close to, had a baby. Katelin was so excited to be an aunt, and she eagerly traveled back home to meet her nephew in December. Katelin was so excited to be back home to her home state visiting her family. In fact, she was so excited that her mother, Lisa, said that it was likely that Katelin would have stayed longer. However, Katelin did recently get accepted into cosmetology school, something that she had wanted to do for quite some time, and for her, classes began on the 7th that month. So with that being said, she couldn't really stay for very long. It was a quick visit to meet her nephew before she would ultimately have to fly out on the 5th. When it was time for her to go to the airport, Lisa would be unable to drop her off at the airport because she had to work that day. So Lisa would call her ex-husband, who was Katelin's ex-stepfather, to see if he would drop her off at the airport. James agreed to do this, and because of that, Lisa took Katelin to his home that morning. Katelin's flight was at 5:40 on that Saturday, and James said that he would have to drop her off a little bit early because he also had to work that day. But he assured Lisa that he would have Katelin at the airport no later than 3 o'clock. At around noon, Katelin had messaged her fiance Amber the message, "Something came up. I'm not coming back today. I'll let you know when I get a new flight. I won't be able to text for a bit." And then at almost 2 that afternoon, James messaged Lisa and let her know that Katelin had requested that he drop her off at the mall instead of at the airport, and said that she would just take the metro from the mall to the airport. Lisa thought that this was a strange request, as Katelin wasn't a fan of the metro and hadn't even used one in over a decade. Then, just 8 minutes after receiving a text from James saying that he was going to drop Katelin off at the mall, Lisa receives a text message from Katelin that read, "I'm at the airport. Battery dying, so I won't be able to text for a bit." One final message would end up coming in from Katelin to Lisa, and it would come in around 7 o'clock that night. And that message just said, "I'm staying with a friend. I need some time alone." Now, Lisa and Amber had also been messaging each other during this time because it seems like a very weird situation. Like something's up. James is saying one thing, Katelin's saying another. Something's not quite right. And it was during this text exchange between Amber and Lisa that Lisa actually found out that Katelin told Amber that she wasn't even going to be making her flight. So obviously, Lisa would end up getting the police involved. And one of the first things that police would do would be to get the phone records of not only Katelin, but also James. And that is where our story begins to get a little weirder. It starts with James. When James had messaged Lisa, letting her know that he was dropping Katelin off at the mall, police compared that to the phone records. And the ping off of James's phone around the time of dropping Katelin off was not near the mall. It was also not near the airport. In fact, when James was supposedly dropping Katelin off, his phone pinged near his home. So it looked like he didn't go to the mall or to the airport. When they got to looking into Caitlin's records and to Caitlin's messages, when Katelin was sending these text messages to Lisa and to Amber, her phone also did not ping at the mall, nor did it ping at the airport. In fact, her phone pinged about 30 miles away from either location. Another final unusual thing to note is despite the fact that James told Lisa he had to work that day, James never actually went to work on that day. So by now, it looks as though it's obvious that Katelin never actually made it to the airport. So where was she? Well, 2 days after she was supposed to fly out, police would find her blue luggage 44 miles away in a wooded area off of a rural road. And when they found this luggage, it was beaten, scratched up. It looked as though it was thrown out of a moving vehicle. When they opened the luggage, it was empty of clothes, it was empty of her cell phone, and it was empty of her high school diploma. But everything else remained in the suitcase. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Her wallet with her ID, her cash, her debit cards, her plane ticket. Everything else was left in the suitcase. Upon this discovery, police would decide that they actually need to speak to James and see what the hell is going on. Obviously, something happened that day. And James originally agreed to take a polygraph test to show that he wasn't involved in anything suspicious. But as it came closer to the time that he was due to do the test, James ended up refusing to do the test. Now, police did end up looking into a lot of leads, but one of the most predominant leads that they looked into was Katelin leaving of her own free will. But Katelin was excited to see her family. She was very close to her family. She was thrilled about becoming an aunt. In fact, that's the point of her traveling in the first place. Not only that, she had been accepted into cosmetology school, something like I said that she had been wanting to do for quite some time. She had a fiance that she loved and was living with and was excited to spend her life with. So what could have motivated her to just up and leave everything she knew? Well, to answer that question, a text exchange between Katelin and one of her friends, Kevin, would come to light. And this text exchange talked about something that happened during her visit that really got to Katelin. She had ended up hanging out with an old high school friend, and that friend had invited her boyfriend over to hang out with her and Katelin. And the three of them would end up drinking that night, and Katelin would end up getting very drunk that night. Once she was drunk, Katelin's friend and her boyfriend allegedly forced themselves onto her. Without being explicit, Katelin had told Kevin in this text message, they did everything to me and to each other. This assault caused her to feel so much guilt and so much sadness. She had told Kevin that she felt like she had cheated on Amber, despite the fact that, according to her, this wasn't consensual and it wasn't something she wanted. She cried all day the next day and was just racked with guilt and depression. Could this have been enough to make her want to just run away? Unfortunately, I don't really have much more to tell you. It's been 6 years and no new leads have come through. No one has been arrested for the crime because there's no proof that there was a crime. Despite the fact that James was very sketchy and put off a very weird vibe, they didn't have a body and they had no proof that a crime was even committed. So, like I said, no arrests were made. The case remains open, and the FBI is still actively looking for tips or leads in hopes of finding her or finding her remains. The case is currently featured on the FBI's missing persons website. Katelin has very distinctive tattoos, including 5 butterflies on her arm and a tattoo of 3 stars on her right foot. At the time of her disappearance, she also had very distinct piercings, including gauged earrings in her earlobes, a navel piercing, a nose piercing, and a lip piercing. At the time of her disappearance, she was around 5'4" and she weighed about 122 pounds. She was last seen in the vicinity of Oakcrest Drive in Partlow, Virginia. If you think you have any helpful information regarding this case, you can submit tips directly to the FBI, and I will be leaving a link down in the description box on where to go to submit those tips. There's also a very active Facebook group that is still looking for Katelin to this day, and I will be leaving that down in the description box below as well. I feel like stories like this are so important to talk about, especially ones where we don't have a resolution. As far as Katelin goes, we don't know where she is, what happened to her, whether she's dead or alive. And in situations like this, the more eyes we can get on this case, on pictures of her tattoos, the more likely we are to come across someone who knows something, who has seen something, who may have seen Katelin and not realize that she was a missing person. And if we can get that information out to those people, it's more likely that we will get tips submitted to the FBI to try to get the family closure on cases like these. Now, if this is the kind of content that you love or that you're interested in, whether it's the true crime murder stories that I do, or even just missing persons cases like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you're liking these videos and make sure you have that post notification bell turned on. That way you'll be notified every time I sit down here for another morbid conversation. Until then, until next time, take care, stay safe. And I'll talk to you guys later, all right? Bye.